To remain a country and a state under a rule of law, we must have men and women that are willing to enforce those laws.
All right, plenty of news to get to this Friday morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to National Report. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Emma Reckenberg. As we begin the end of this work week here, we start with the very latest from a Florida courtroom where we might see the affidavit, or parts of it, that led to the FBI raid of former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. U.S. Magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhart ruling a redacted copy of the affidavit might be released, ordering the Justice Department to present proposed redactions by next Thursday. Judge Reinhart also unsealing more minor documents containing general election at the hearing, including the cover sheet and the government's motion to seal the warrant. According to Reuters, the cover sheet said the Justice Department is investigating the willful retention of national defense information, the concealment or removal of government records, and obstruction of a federal investigation. President Trump has made several statements calling on the court to unseal the unredacted version of the affidavit. With more on the ruling, let's welcome in congressional correspondent Kilmeny Dukart, live for us in our Washington newsroom. Kilmeny, good morning.
Good morning, Emma. The White House has largely remained silent on the matter. The president has no public events on his schedule for today and only returned to Washington briefly to sign his Inflation Reduction Act. And the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, refusing to weigh in on the Justice Department's investigation on ABC's This Week.
I cannot speak to that. It would be inappropriate for me to speak on that because the president has been very clear and unequivocal about this, is that when it comes to law enforcement matters, investigation, the Department of Justice has complete independence. And he has said that during his campaign. He has said that as president, we do not interfere. We do not get briefed. We do not get involved.
And as you reported, Judge Bruce Reinhart releasing several procedural court documents yesterday related to the FBI's raid, including the application for the search warrant, revealing potential crimes, including the willful retention of national defense information, concealment or removal of government records, and obstruction of a federal investigation. But there's been heated debate, Emma, over whether the former president, is in violation of the Espionage Act, which is a century-old law which our lawmakers have argued is not only overly broad, but needs to be perhaps amended or repealed altogether. In Statute 18 of the U.S. Code, under Section 793, the law states whoever lawfully having possession of, access to, control over, or being entrusted with any document or willfully retains the same and fails to deliver it on demand to the officer or employee of the United States entitled to receive it is in violation of the Espionage Act. Reinhart ordered that the government prosecutor submit a redacted version of that affidavit, explain those redactions, and submit them by August 25th. The government's prosecutor, Bret, he's argued against releasing it, saying that it's going to provide a roadmap for its ongoing investigation, which could potentially discourage other witnesses from coming forward. We know, Emma, that Reinhart is going to review these redactions and potentially submit his own. This essentially shows the DOJ's steps and methods that led to the raid on the former president's home. We still don't know how much of that, Emma, we're going to see.
Indeed, and they have until Thursday to submit those retractions, so we'll be watching closely when it does come. Kilmeny Dukart with the latest from Washington. Kilmeny, thank you. Joining us now to discuss, former White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. Sir, welcome to National Report. Thank you so much for coming on today. You know, clearly this is an interest to the public and also media organizations. As we know, media have called to publish this affidavit so we can really see what's behind this search. Do you believe it should be released, and would you like to see it in its entirety?
Good morning, Emma. Thanks very much for having me. I would like to see it. I don't need to see it in its entirety. I don't think anybody does. I don't have interest in the names of the people and so forth. I'm not interested in the witch hunt or sort of the cocktail party discussion about who the leaker might be. What I'm interested in seeing is, why did the FBI think that this was so unusual and so extraordinary? What was so special about this that they had to invade a former president's home? That the standard for this should be outrageously high. As I've said several times before, if there was a dead body then that's one thing. If they were really only going in looking for documents, that's going to be a problem, and it's a problem that even the left recognizes. The FBI has had various left-leaning legal analysts have said that this would be an outrage or a dangerous search if it was just looking for documents. So yes, I think we should see the affidavit. I don't think we need to see all of the things. We're not interested in interfering with an ongoing FBI investigation, but the FBI should at least be able to show people why they thought this was such an extraordinary circumstance as to go into the president's home.
Right. Just unprecedented, right? When we saw it unfold, when we gathered the details, the fact that there were a number of FBI agents that went into Mar-a-Lago at a time when Donald Trump was not there, and they took items. There were questions about what was caught on surveillance camera, where they were looking, even reports that they were going through the former First Lady's closet as well. Plenty of questions remain as to how this even really happened. As we know, the primary accusation against the former president is that he illegally possessed classified information. Now, the Trump team's defense has been that President Trump had almost a standing order that any classified documents removed by him from the Oval Office were considered declassified. And I know you worked closely with Donald Trump. Did any such order exist when you served as chief of staff? What sort of protocol was it for handling classified documents during your tenure?
Yeah, I was surprised by some of the reporting on that, some of the comments by some of the president's inner circle. Here's generally how it was supposed to work. Yes, the president of the United States, any president of the United States, has broad authority to declassify documents. That being said, there's a formal structure to doing that. You can't just sort of stand over a box of documents, wave your hand and say, these are all declassified. That's not how the system works. We declassified, for example, documents related to the conversations with the president of Ukraine during the impeachment process. You don't just sort of get to say off the top of your head, oh, everything that I see today is declassified. And that seems to be the argument that some of the president's insider team is making right now. So no, that sort of order didn't exist when I was chief of staff. I read news reports this morning that John Kelly, my predecessor as chief of staff, said the same thing. That order was not in place when he was in the White House. Was it possible that it went in late in the administration? Yes. But it would be extraordinarily unusual, and there would be a paper trail that I think it will be incumbent upon former President Trump to bring out if that's really going to be part of his defense here.
Again, as we wait for what might actually be within this affidavit, I've just got to ask you to somewhat speculate on the timing of it all, right? Did anything stand out to you about why it was happening now, why this raid took place now?
That's actually, Emma, the real reason I'd like to see the affidavit is that there's three things you have to show to get a search warrant, which is you have to make a showing of probable cause that a crime has been committed, that there's evidence in a certain location, and this is the critical part, that you have reason to believe that the evidence is going to move or disappear or be destroyed. The president wasn't even in Mar-a-Lago when the search warrant was served. What was it about? What did the FBI know that gave them the ability to go to the judge and say, we need to get in there today? Keep in mind, they had been in there in June. They had free access to the materials just a couple of months ago. What happened between June and early August where the FBI said, oh, my goodness, these documents are going to disappear. We have to have a search warrant for the former president's home. That's the first thing I'll be looking for in the affidavit, because that's the unusual part here. A subpoena, not at all unusual. The FBI had a subpoena in June. It's the search warrant, the going in the house. It's extraordinary. And as you mentioned correctly, unprecedented. And I think it's going to be incumbent on the FBI to sort of explain that after this affidavit comes out.
You know, supporters of the former president say, it's beyond just classified documents that they're going after. Essentially, they want to stop him from running again in 2024. We know he's leading in the polls right now on the GOP side. You know Donald Trump. Do you think how this is all played out, is this deterring him from possibly seeking office a second time?
I've heard all sorts of theories that the Democrats are doing this in order to make sure he can't run, that the Democrats are doing this in order to make sure that he does run. My theory about Washington, Emma, is don't ever assume a strategy when pure incompetence will explain things. I don't think there's a plan to what the Democrats are doing, especially on the January 6th committee. But you ask a fair question. Do I think Donald Trump is running? Yes. Do I think it's more likely that he's going to run because of what's happening with the FBI? Yes. I think Donald Trump has been damaged politically by the January 6th committee. People have been stunned to see his behavior on January 6th and the run up to the riots and so forth. But he's earned a great deal of sympathy over the course of the last 2 weeks since the raid, and I think rightly so. People feel as though the FBI has been politicized, weaponized in order to harm a political opponent of the current administration. I think they may be right. So I think whatever the Democrat plan was, I think the bottom line here is that Donald Trump is more likely to run for president again today than he was 2 weeks ago.
Christopher Wray, a Trump appointee, FBI director. And then keep in mind, Merrick Garland also signed off on the search warrant there. So just kind of interesting to keep all the players in mind as we are watching what happens. And we will learn more, hopefully, next week. While we've got you, though, Mick, I got to ask you about the midterm elections. Donald Trump's endorsements and their candidates, they've done pretty well during the primaries. I think it's above 90%. But let's look at the generals and maybe even the fall election here. Mitch McConnell, GOP leader in the Senate, essentially has some doubts about the Trump-backed candidates. He told this to a reporter at MSNBC. Let's listen.
I think there's probably a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. Senate races are just different. They're statewide. Candidate quality has a lot to do with the outcome.
So what's your anticipation? Again, we're talking about speculation here, right? But we kind of know, at least past the primaries, who the candidates will be. And maybe the more competitive states, when we look at the Senate in Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania as well, those Trump-backed candidates, how do you think they'll play in the general?
Yeah, I think Mitch McConnell's probably right. I'll be a little bit more candid than he is. I think that's still likely the Republicans take the House. It's growing less and less likely that Republicans take the Senate because they have bad candidates in Georgia and in Pennsylvania especially. Bad candidates lose. As I told the president many, many times, that if you win a primary and lose a general, you're still a loser. And right now, our candidates in Georgia and Pennsylvania are not doing extraordinarily well. President Trump helped those two folks to win the primary, but we need them to win the general, or else it doesn't really make much difference. Bad candidates lose. Good candidates have a chance to win. We've got good candidates in other places. J.D. Vance is struggling a little bit in Ohio with fundraising. I think Blake Masters is doing better out in Arizona. So we still have some good candidates. We have some chances. And I say we, the Republicans. Obviously, I'm a Republican. But yeah, I think some of the folks that Donald Trump backed in the primary have proven so far to not be up to the test of running statewide. Mitch McConnell's right about that. It's hard to run for Senate. Just because Donald Trump ran for president and the very first time won doesn't mean it's easy to do. It's extraordinarily difficult. And Herschel Walker's never run for office. Dr. Oz has never run for office before. It's hard to do, and I think you'll continue to see these candidates suffer, and there's a good chance the Democrats retain the Senate as a result.
They were the GOP picks, and we're going to watch what happens several months from now in November. Appreciate you coming on this morning. Mick Mulvaney, thank you so much.
Thanks, Emma.
You're welcome. All right, let's check in now with Alex Kramer. She's got some other stories we're following. Hey, Alex.
It's now time for your Newsmax News Minute. Well, multiple fatalities are being reported after two small private planes collided mid-air in California yesterday. Watsonville officials say 3 people were on board the aircraft, which crashed as both pilots were attempting to land in the city's municipal airport. The FAA and the National Transportation Safety Board are currently investigating. And Brian Stelter is departing CNN as his Sunday show, Reliable Sources, has been canceled. Stelter has hosted the network's longest-running show for 9 years and was informed of the decision just yesterday. The organization has also recently scrapped its streaming program, CNN Plus. The Reliable Sources newsletter will continue to be made. And Northwestern University chemists are touting a breakthrough experiment in which they were able to use sodium hydroxide to break down a harmful forever chemical called PFAS. Now, the compound appears in hundreds of everyday objects such as makeup, rain gear, and soap, and can cause serious.
Officer Ben Darby, a former Huntsville, Alabama officer, made a split-second decision, shooting and killing an armed suspect who allegedly posed a deadly threat to him and 2 other police officers. Darby has been sentenced to 25 years in prison. Joining us now to discuss is his wife, Keelan Darby. Keelan, welcome to National Report. Thank you so much for coming on. I can't really imagine what you're feeling right now, what you're going through. Of course, your husband and you are separated right now. Tell me the very latest.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. We've been separated for a year now. He's been in prison for doing exactly what he was trained to do by Huntsville Police Department and Alabama police standards. He answered a call on April 3rd, 2018, and did exactly what he was trained to do, was cleared by department investigation. He had a trial 3 years after the fact, which so many things were not allowed into evidence. His Sixth Amendment constitutional rights were violated to a public trial testimony was not allowed to be heard. The jury wasn't allowed to hear that he followed his training and that he was actually cleared by the department, and the other 2 officers on scene were not. So many things that we are fighting this appeal and very hopeful that he will come home. Supreme Court case law backs Ben, and that's what we are fighting.
Indeed, 25 years. It's such a long prison sentence, of course, and that just must be incredibly difficult to be separated from your husband right now. Again, back to the very basics, he had acted quickly in response to a suicidal man who was reportedly holding a gun to his head. And your husband felt threatened in the moment, is that right? You say he was acting in self-defense?
Yes, ma'am. So law enforcement officers nationwide, I'm a police officer as well, so I can speak to this professionally. We are trained to not go into a house when there is a gun involved with one person. We're trained to pull them out of the house, get them out of the house, and deal with them outside. And that's exactly what he had in his mind going to that call. The 2 original responding officers went against that training, went inside the house so that they didn't have any cover or concealment, anything to protect them from the individual with the gun that was to his head. When Ben got there, he saw that his fellow officer was in danger, was not protecting herself, not using the techniques that we've been taught. And Ben entered the residence and told the man to put the gun down. The man refused, said, "I'm not going to do it." And Ben said, "I'm not going to tell you again, put the gun down." And as he said that, Parker had made a furtive movement towards Ben, and Ben defended his life and the other 2 officers' lives that day.
You know, when we talk about the dangers of the day-to-day that police officers face when they respond to calls, right? When you get a 911 call and you're sent to a home for domestic or other calls, you don't really know what's on the other side of that door. Tell me about what goes through a police officer's mind, since you yourself served in the force, you know, what you're thinking through when you arrive on scene.
Yeah, so dispatch gives us the brief details that they know, and we have to go based off of our training, you know, what could potentially happen, what we're looking at. All he knew going into that call was Parker had called and said, "I've got a gun. I'm fixing to blow my brains out. The front door's open." So you've got a potential ambush that you're looking at. You know that there's a gun involved, so the potential for deadly force is there. And that's all that Ben went off of. And then his training to know, he knew not to go into that house. But because the officers who arrived there first did and put themselves in danger, he had no other choice. He had to help protect them.
And Keelan, you say there's an appeal process underway?
Yes, we have been in the process of appeal with the Alabama Criminal Courts of Appeals. They've had all of our paperwork from us and from the Attorney General's office, who's now prosecuting the case, since April. And we are waiting, ready on standby for them to make a decision. Unfortunately, they don't have a timeline. We have had a timeline throughout this whole process. They do not have a timeline. So we are patiently waiting and eager to hear of their decision. Like I said, Graham versus Connor, which is Supreme Court case law, backs Ben, as well as many other 11th Circuit cases. And Alabama law protects Ben. Alabama 13A327 is a justifiable homicide for a police officer in the defense of their life or another person's life, and exactly is what Ben did.
All right. We'll have to leave it right there. Keelan Darby coming on, sharing your story. Come back, of course, whenever you have an update. I'm sure our viewers are parents who confront school board officials at those meetings. Let's bring in now our panelists with us this morning. Former New York Assemblyman, President of Common Sense Strategies, Steve Levy. Also with us, prosecutor and Newsmax contributor, Wendy Patrick. All right. If you're in New Jersey there and you're a parent at a school board meeting, Wendy, are you going to think twice before you speak out if you take issue with what's being taught in your student's classroom?
If you're following the news, you probably would, Emma. You know, we always presume everybody is following the trends and tips and tactics of those who would seek to maintain order. Perhaps they would phrase it that way at some of these school board meetings. But you know what? Everybody has to know that these are some of the most contentious settings that one can imagine. I mean, we're talking about our children, the future of our nation. And you can imagine there are lots of reasons to want to keep these things civil, but perhaps not in the ways that we see promoted. And that is where the real division is occurring, as indicated in that ad.
Yeah, it's divisive, no doubt, Steve. You've got this teachers union organization calling parents and referring to them as extremists with their rhetoric. What do you think about that?
What's most frightening about this is it's not just the teachers union, which you would expect. It's, a very left-wing radical group that's trying to indoctrinate our children. But they're allied now with the Department of Justice, which has been working side by side to try to label our parents just concerned about the welfare of their kids as being terrorists. This is a very dangerous plane that we're playing on.
You know, Wendy, I'm just wondering from a political standpoint, if you want to win over the parents who've had, maybe a bit of hesitation about what's being taught in their child's classroom that they learned during the pandemic while they were remote learning, or they've sort of entered the homeschool arena or considering it, is that ad going to draw them back into the public school classrooms?
I can't imagine that there would be a rush to re-enter the classroom given the way the rules are being applied. And I say the rules are being applied, I'm almost making a joke out of that, because what are the rules? What are you allowed to say? What topics are we allowed to concede that our kids are being taught? And shouldn't parents be the one raising their kids instead of leaving it to the schools? All of those issues are coming up surrounding the re-entry into the system. At the very least, some parents, even if they were trying to also balance a job, if they're homeschooling their kids, at least they knew what their kids were being taught. So you're right, Emma, this is a huge issue.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm wondering too, as we get closer to the midterms, parents will have their kids back in the classroom by November, clearly. How does education and issues regarding education play into the political arena?
Well, we saw what happened in Virginia with Youngkin, who took it straight on, and the parents said, yeah, we want someone fighting for us. What COVID did was open the eyes of parents as to actually what was happening in their schools with this type of indoctrination. Children being taught to hate America, to hate their founding fathers, to pit black and white children against each other, to tell boys they're girls, girls they're boys, and parents saying, what in the world is going on here? So there's been a wake-up call. And what Chris Rufo of the Manhattan Institute, who's been a scholar on this issue and has been providing information for parents, has noted, there is a design by the teachers' unions to shield the parents from actually knowing what's going on with these insidious programs that are being foisted upon our children in this form of indoctrination. People are finally waking up, and it's going to have an impact at the ballot box.
Yeah, you point out Virginia, that Glenn Youngkin victory was quite telling, quite frankly, for a state that typically leans blue, of course, to have a GOP governor serving. Just fascinating. We'll see if that impacts November. Let me pivot to what also might play a role in motivating people to the polls. We'll see. This, of course, has to do with that unprecedented raid at Mar-a-Lago against former President Donald Trump. Here's what quite frankly, the media wants some clarity here on this affidavit, and we've got a soundbite from the attorney for ABC in the Wall Street Journal. This is Deanna Schulman speaking after the judge's ruling yesterday. Here's what she said.
He will consider redactions proposed by the Department of Justice, which are due to him August 25th. He will accept any briefing of the Department of Justice on those redactions.
All right, so a week from now, Wendy, we might hear more based on what the DOJ decides to redact from the affidavit. Is this a step forward into more transparency?
Well, I have to say, Emma and Steve, I don't expect this to be the big reveal. Absolutely, the Department of Justice is going to want to protect these sensitive parts of that affidavit. So I'm worried that the affidavit is simply going to look like a page of blacked out lettering. And rightfully so would be what the DOJ would argue. They want to make sure they not only protect their own agents, but sources, methods, confidential citizens that have stepped out to provide investigation. Not to mention, Emma, this investigation has been revealed to be in its early stages. Now, I know some people think, well, then why were we already serving search warrants? Okay, good question. But be that as it may, if it is in the initial stages and it is a roadmap, is what this affidavit would show, they'd be throwing up a roadblock if they were to reveal too much of this. So this is not the type of thing where I would expect the DOJ is going to give the judge a full transparency version of the affidavit. I think more often than not, these types of things lead to a negotiation between the parties as to what eventually will be revealed, not next Thursday.
What do you predict, Steve? Would you like to see a page that's not completely Sharpied out?
Well, you know, there are reasons why you want to preserve some secrecy to protect confidential witnesses, and you want to encourage people to come forward and to speak freely. And these documents are very one-sided, and the person who's the subject can be stigmatized. So there are reasons to want to hold back. By the same token, you have the subject here, President Trump, who's saying, no, let it out. In addition to that, you have a judge who, let's face it, is biased here. This is the same judge who just, a few months earlier had to recuse himself because of the nasty things he said about the then president of the United States. On top of that, you really can't give the FBI the benefit of the doubt here. This is an FBI that was complicit in lies that came to them with the Steele dossier, complicit in lies from Michael Sussman, a Democratic activist attorney who said that Trump was getting back-channel communications to banks to Putin, which was a lie. And then, you had the Pfizer application where the FBI was doctoring information to get an illegal wiretap against Carter Page to spy against Donald Trump. So, people are very skeptical, and for good reason.
Right. And again, not offering this criticism to the individual FBI agents who are just following the orders that they've been directed to do. But definitely questions remain as to, what was really behind this whole raid at Mar-a-Lago. We continue to ask those, and maybe we'll learn more from the affidavit next Thursday. Just stay tuned. Steve Levy and Wendy Patrick, thank you, panel. Appreciate you coming on today. Before we begin our weekend here, we start with this. Some weather alerts for you. Extreme weather in both parts of the country. Eastern Massachusetts, just outside of Cape Cod. Much of Rhode Island dealing with extreme drought. This all according to the U.S. Drought Monitor, something to keep an eye on there. Plus, out in the West, about 10 million people under flood watches. Arizona, New Mexico, and southern Utah could see about 4 inches of rain. The rain forecasted to move into Texas, where 5 inches could fall in the coming days. We will keep an eye on your weather watch for you. Meantime, this in news for you. A Florida judge has ordered the DOJ to put forward proposed redactions of the affidavit used to justify the search warrant on Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. For more on the investigation and what the White House is saying, or what it's not, let's bring in congressional correspondent Kilmeny Dukart from the North Lawn today. Kilmeny, good morning.
Good morning, Emma. The White House has largely remained silent on the matter. The president has no public events on his schedule today, only returning briefly to the White House earlier this week to sign the Inflation Reduction Act. And the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, refusing to weigh in on the Justice Department's investigation on ABC's This Week.
Cannot speak to that. It would be inappropriate for me to speak on that because the president has been very clear and unequivocal about this, is that when it comes to law enforcement matters, investigation, the Department of Justice has complete independence. And he has said that during his campaign. He has said that as president, we do not interfere. We do not get briefed. We do not get involved.
But Judge Bruce Reinhart released several procedural court documents yesterday related to the FBI's raid, including this application for the search warrant revealing potential crimes, including the willful retention of national defense information, concealment or removal of government records, and obstruction of a federal investigation. But there's been heated debate, Emma, over whether the former president violated the Espionage Act.